What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
All right, Jane, thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the Learning Leader Show.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm glad to be here. I'm a fan and I'm excited.
Wow. I mean, that's really cool. I appreciate you saying that. So I usually, when I get a book, especially of a notable author who I really admire and have looked up to for a while, like you, I flip to the back to the acknowledgement sections, which I did for yours, but I also flipped to the front. In the front, the book's dedicated to Kelly McGonigal, your sister, who lives 6 minutes in the future. What does that mean?
So Kelly, who some of your listeners may know from her TED Talk.
343 on this show.
Yes, on how to make stress your friend. And she teaches psychology at Stanford. She was born 6 minutes before I was. And, you know, that's like a natural leadership position, being the firstborn twin. Everybody treats you as more mature and wiser. And it definitely affected our relationship growing up and continues today.
What is that twin relationship like, given that you both have gone out into the world, you do your work, you've both made separate names for yourselves. You're still obviously attached, you have the same last name, and I know there's a lot of love there. But what's that been like growing up, and then now as you've both created what you have for yourselves?
It was really helpful for me to see somebody go out and strive for goals that I hadn't thought of for myself and achieve them. Because when you have an identical twin, it's somebody with the same DNA as you. They grew up in the same house, the same educational opportunities. And so if she would achieve something, I would say, well, wait, I should do that too. She went off to do her PhD at Stanford. And then, you know, a year later, I'm like, oh, I never thought of doing a PhD, but I'm going to try that too. And then I gave a TED Talk and she gave her a TED Talk. And we're just like constantly being able to almost like simulate a second life, you know, and be like, wow, that worked out for her. I have the genes, I have the destiny in my DNA to do it too. So you kind of get to go for twice as much as you might otherwise.
Is it competitive?
I mean, not anymore. You know, as you, I think, get older, you realize nobody in the world really is as happy for your success as somebody close, like a sibling. And so we try to be happy for each other and not competitive.
That's really cool. I mean, I identify with this with a younger brother, close in age, where we both played sports and went on to do some cool things. And I'm with you. Like he won a Super Bowl in the NFL, and I was just like, it was one of the greatest days of our family's lives. It was just amazing that I've said this to him before. Like your work and in our work in some cases has created so many amazing moments for our family. Like how could you not be grateful for that? You know, like it's so cool. So I sense like a little kinship that you guys probably have something similar.
Yes, that's beautiful how you said that. And, you know, sometimes when I get asked to speak to students or people starting out in their careers, the biggest piece of advice I give them is be happy for other people who are succeeding. Don't begrudge other people who've maybe gotten further than you faster, because in reality, most of the people who are successful, there's a lot of people who like them less than they used to. There's like envy, jealousy, bitterness. And if you can actually support people when they're successful, I think, you know, people would be surprised to realize that that's a superpower. That's a strength. And people will remember when you were happy for them instead of being, you know, jealous or
genuinely happy. Like I do this little bit in talks with your who, and one of the parts of your who is who's beside you. And one of, I think the definitions of that is that there's a no judgment zone. So you can call them when you've really stepped in it, you've really messed up. But on the other end, they are genuinely excited and happy for you when it goes well. Not like the fake, oh, good job, but then they're behind your back, but they genuinely like, yes, let's do this. You know what I mean? That's, I think that's a critical component. So anyway, I just wanted to start with love because I think it's so cool what both of you have accomplished. So I want to talk about a number of things with you, Jamie, because as I was reading through all of your work, obviously this book and some of your past work, TED Talk, all of that, I was thinking of like the future. I was thinking of the pandemic and things like that. And one of the issues was I felt people were more nervous and anxious about uncertainty than they would be just getting bad news. And so maybe you can share some of the science behind that, because I think one of the things leaders can do is help create a little bit of certainty in an uncertain world. Well, how do you view uncertainty and the fact that I think there is science out there that states people would rather receive bad news than just have this uncertainty of, oh my God, what's going to happen?
Yes, that is absolutely true. I mean, let me speak to it from my perspective as a game designer. You know, one of the benefits of playing any kind of game, whether it's Fortnite or Minecraft or a simulation of a future pandemic, is that you get to try different strategies and you get to play with different creative approaches. And this really actually allows you to be more comfortable with uncertainty, because if there is a whole spectrum of possibilities, you can play with them so that you have an idea of what it might feel like or how you might react or how it might go. And I do think that gamers actually do have a little more comfort with uncertainty because they're used to that very expansive possibility space, right? We're not always trying to shut it down. Like, you think even a game like chess, you know, when you start the game, there are more possible games to be played than there are atoms in the universe. Now, that is not hyperbole. I mean, you can run the math on it. And so you have to be comfortable with anything could happen, and just continuing to, you know, experiment and be ready and make your next move with the information that you have.
You mentioned running simulations, and the wild thing at the beginning of this book that I told you before, it was almost unbelievable, like literally unbelievable. It's like, I don't like that word, but in this case, it almost was that you, and I want you to explain this. You ran a pandemic simulation before it happened. Can you share more about this, as well as like some of the follow-up as it then happened, and maybe what some of the people who were a part of that game design, a part of that simulation, had to say when it went from this simulation versus real life?
Yes. So, you know, if people have seen my TED Talk about how games can make a better world, I actually describe these two simulations in that talk because we had just played one and we were just about to start another. So these two games, they were called Superstruct and Evoke. So, you know, people are like, oh, I do remember Jane talking about, we were going to bring ordinary people together and ask them what they might do to try to adapt and survive different global crises. And at the heart of both of them was a respiratory pandemic. And we were running these simulations in the years 2008 and 2010, but the actual game was set in the years 2019 and 2020. And, you know, the scenario included details like it started in China and there was this global misinformation campaign, conspiracy theories being spread by a group called Citizen X in our game, you know, obviously parallels to QAnon in the real 2020. We were talking about how pandemic response might be complicated by extreme wildfires on the West Coast of the United States, how it might be complicated by infrastructure breaking down, like unprecedented power grid disruption. I mean, all these things that actually happened in 2019 and 2020. And when all of the real pandemic started unfolding, I started getting calls from people who remembered that I had run this game. We had more than 30,000 participants who spent 10 weeks just thinking, okay, what would I do? How would I react? What would I need? How could I try to help? And you have to understand these simulations, it's not like a computer program where I design exactly what I think will happen. And then you say, okay, I would do this. And then the game tells you, okay, well, you survived or you didn't survive. Nothing like that. It's all social intelligence. It's all people telling stories. We collected hundreds of thousands of stories and then ran analysis to find out, what are people going to do, even if it's against the law? Where will they go? What will they need? Under what circumstances will they isolate and quarantine? And in what circumstances will they say, I'm just going to risk it? We were forecasting that the fights over masking, we were forecasting that if we didn't pay people to stay home, it wasn't going to happen. We were forecasting moms having to drop out of the workforce because if schools were closed, who's going to stay home with the kids? So people are calling me at the beginning of the pandemic and I'm saying, great, here's what we learned. Here's what to expect, get ready. And I was advising, people from like top executives from Silicon Valley companies, government foundations, international governing groups. And so at first I was like, okay, great. We predicted it. Everybody will listen to us, but of course, what I discovered is being able to sort of accurately predict the future is not enough. You have to get people themselves to pre-feel these futures. They're not going to listen. If what you say sounds counterintuitive or surprising, which the future often is, unless they have purposely unstuck their minds already, they're still going to be stuck in old ways of doing things, or they'll get, frozen with anxiety. And, so I spent the last almost 2 years talking to people who participated in these games to see, well, were you able to act faster? Did you adapt more successfully? Did you feel better? Did you kind of avoid some of that overwhelming anxiety and trauma? And the short answer is yes, definitely. People, it was that confidence that comes with not fighting reality. When is a pandemic really going to be that big a deal? Is it really going to be that disruptive? All of this nonsense that went on in the beginning when we were denying what was happening already and that it was coming our way, they just skipped right past that. And they'd already felt the fear. They've processed how difficult it would be. And so they were able to just get in there, get on with it. And so that's what I'm doing now with my new book and with my work at the Institute for the Future is we're looking forward. Okay, we've survived this. What's next? What's the next, pandemic-like global disruption that we can play with now while it's safe, while it's a game, while we can just explore all the possibilities.
Wow, I would not have believed any of this if you would have told it to me when you ran. I would say, oh, okay, cool game, but that's obviously never going to happen. Like, even if something comes over, we'll figure it out. If we have to chill out for a couple days, whatever, but we're not going to do this for years.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have believed you. So I'm just curious, and maybe this is a stupid question, but like, what are you testing now? What are you simulating now for 10 years from now, or however long from now that we wouldn't believe is even within the realm of possibility?
Right. So for this book, I came up with 12 scenarios that I think are worth testing. One of the most practical ones, sort of really down to earth, is what happens when we switch to digital currency, programmable money, right? This is a very practical thing. It's definitely going to happen. Almost every nation with a sovereign monetary system is already doing this. They're getting ready to, it'll be a combination of cryptocurrency and just traditional database. But, when there is a complete record of every unit of currency, where it's been, where it's going, and we can program it, right? Like the government could give out economic stimulus, that money that expires in 30 days if you don't spend it, right? They could create negative interest. If you're just sitting on a pile of cash, like some companies are, Apple, right? That there's negative interest on it because they want that money getting reinvested or paid out to employees. So that's just an example. Like when we're just all digital, and we're not just talking, again, the sort of cryptocurrency culture now is not government, not central backed digital currencies, but the governments are going to do it too. And that's something to get ready for.
I mean, as an aside, then, are you like investing in Bitcoin, Ethereum, other cryptocurrencies, NFTs? Are you into that?
I am not super into that because I'll just give you my perspective, right?
Okay.
I've been very successful in my career, made a lot of money, and I made a decision about a decade ago to invest all my money in municipal bonds. So I make all of my interest helping communities build schools, build hospitals, build bridges. I don't really play with the stock market. I don't play with crypto because that's just sort of my commitment to the future. If I'm going to make money, I feel really good about making that interest off of building things that are good for the world. It's kind of a unique, I think, perspective. I'm sure I could make more money, but I've got plenty of money, and I'd rather my investments, I can drive across the Golden Gate Bridge and be like, yeah, I helped rebuild this. This is my bridge, I love it.
I love it. So there's questions, and so I'm a prompt driven thinker and writer and speaker, and so I love that your book is packed with questions throughout, and I want to ask some of them. I want to surface some of these questions that you are posing throughout the book. I encourage people to get it. It kind of will mess with your mind a little bit because it'll just make you think so much, and that's pretty rare. I mean, like I give you credit because I don't know how you write a book like this out of thin air. But you said there's 3 questions to give you a baseline sense of your quote future mindset.
Yes.
So let me just start with number 1, and we'll go there first, and we'll see what happens with 2 and 3. So when you think about the next 10 years, do you think things will mostly stay the same and go on as normal, or do you expect that most of us will dramatically rethink and reinvent how we do things? Why is this question number 1 of the baseline sense of your future mindset?
Well, first of all, what's your number for that question? Or where are you? 10, everything changes. 1, we're all.
I know I'm more closer to a 10 than I am a 1 because of, immediately everyone just probably thinks of themselves and where they were 10, or me. Okay, I shouldn't speak from, I think of myself and where I was 10 years ago, how the world has changed, how I've changed my career, my life. And it's basically all completely different when it comes to personal, professional. I mean, I do this full time now. Even 5 years ago, I wasn't doing it full time. So let alone 10, it wasn't even a thought. So that's why I'm more to the far end of, I have no idea. This is why when you ask me, what are you going to be doing in 5 years, or in the interview question, I'm probably the worst at answering that, because I'm just gonna be like, dude, I don't know. I mean, like, I know I have like a North Star, but I don't know really what's going to happen, so I'm closer to a 10 on that question. How about you?
Oh, I love that. I mean, I'm like a 10 also, and I'll explain why this question is so important to think about. But I want to say, like, I think if you dig into these future imagination training skills, you'll definitely be able to come up with vivid ideas for 5 or 10 years out. I know, and I've heard you talk about, you really do have huge plans and visions and goals for yourself. And so a lot of this, futurist thinking, imagination training will help you bring the kind of specificity to it that helps other allies come along with you. And whether you're raising money, or you're trying to create a movement, or you're trying to motivate yourself. But we start with this question because having what I call an unstuck mind, not getting stuck in patterns from the past or the assumptions of how things are today and will always be. this is so central to success and happiness in life. We know, starting with depression, right? One of the symptoms of depression is having a fixed mindset, like nothing can change, nothing can get better. Neurologically, if you can jumpstart your brain by activating the pathways that allow you to anticipate change rather than constantly obsessing over the patterns of the past. It's just good for our happiness and well-being. It's good for innovation. You want to really be thinking creatively and challenging assumptions. And the more you anticipate change, the more likely you are to come up with these really visionary ideas. If you're trying to change the world, through activism, a social movement, it can be really hard to keep the momentum and motivation. It takes a long time for things to change. But if you can keep that sense of, well, how far have we come? How long did it take for these other movements? Then as long as you believe that change is possible in that 10-year timeline, it can help you stay motivated with things that it does take a long time to change. And I like the 10-year timeline because if you look at history, it took 10 years for Facebook to go from 1 user to 1 billion users. It took Bitcoin to go from 10 years to just being an idea in a scientific article to having almost $1 trillion market cap. It took 10 years from the very first protest against racial segregation to the successful passage of civil rights in the United States. I mean, 10 years, we can get a lot done in 10 years. And so that's kind of how far out I encourage people to look so we can stay open-minded and have that sense that anything can be different, even things that seem impossible to change today.
Do you build out these plans for what you want to do in your life, in your career, 5 years, 10 years? Like, do you do that? Are these written down somewhere?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So, so sort of famously towards the start of my career, and so it's interesting. It's not so much as goal setting. I like to talk about the world I want to wake up in, and I want to be a part of making that world. But it's not necessarily something I would check off my own list, like, publish a book or earn a PhD. I mean, that's just like normal stuff. But I like to talk about
not normal.
Well, anybody could write it on a list, but I like to talk about, I think of it like in the term of movie trailers. Do you remember like all these old movie trailers, 80s and 90s and the 2000s? They would start with a voice that said, "This is a world in which," and it'd be like something weird, like water no longer exists, or like everyone, must defend their lives, whatever. And it tells you the like the context for this crazy story. So I think about 10 years out, what do I want to wake up in that would make people say, that's impossible, or like, I can't even imagine that. I try to describe that. So early in my career, I said, I want to wake up in a world in which a game designer has won a Nobel Prize. And I was thinking maybe the Nobel Peace Prize. And this is, I started my career very active in groups like the Game Developers Conference, the International Game Developers Association. I was trying to get everybody excited about understanding the real impact on people's lives that these games have, psychologically, socially, mentally, all of that. And so, I just, as a provocation, what kind of games would we be making that this would not be ridiculous sounding, right? I love ridiculous sounding futures. We have, if you visit us at the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, we have painted on our big front gallery window this phrase, any useful idea about the future should sound ridiculous at first, right? Because we want to like shock ourselves with either, the crises or disruption we might wake up in, or these goals or visions that they're so transformative, people dismiss them. So anyway, that was like early in my career. I said by the year 2023 that a game developer would at least be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Now look at the clock, look at the calendar. It's been going on for 15 years, Ryan. I've got one more year. So if any Nobel Prize nominators are listening, This is it. This is the year.
Let's go. Do you are you a believer in like talking things into existence?
Yeah.
Say more, because like I go back and forth on this stuff. Honestly, like I go back and forth on goal setting. I go back and forth on keeping things to yourself versus putting them out there into the world. And you know, I'm honestly conflicted on these things. And this year I've publicly stated goals and put them out there for everyone who listens. They know them. They're not a lot. They're aligned with my values. So it's a different year. So I'm kind of shifting more towards this way. But this kind of talking, I've seen like professional golfers hold up the notes app on their phone after they've won a champion. I think it was Justin Thomas. He held it up. He's like, look, here are my goals. And they were wildly ambitious, especially at the time he set them. And then he like basically hit all of them, and they were crazy, big wins and all this. So talk to me about why you do this and why you think this is something that we all should do.
Well, I have a story for you, actually.
Please.
So this is the story of how I became a professional futurist, and which has everything to do with essentially talking things into being.
What a cool job, by the way. Like, could you have imagined when you were 12 that this was a thing, that this could be like your life's work?
I had no idea it existed as a career path. Cool. So I got scouted to become a futurist. And so this was like back in 2007. So I had just finished my PhD like a year or two before at UC Berkeley. And I was studying how we could create new kinds of games to let gamers try to help with global challenges. So like this idea of massively multiplayer science is actually pretty common now. I was one of the first people to write about, let's just give gamers data sets from real scientific research efforts. So now you can play Galaxy Zoo and help, astrophysicists look for things in space, or you can play Fold It, where you're folding proteins in these 3D virtual environments to help come up with new ways to cure diseases. I was trying to figure out, let's get gamers, let's use some of this billions of hours we're spending every week to harness just a little bit, because we can, like 95% of gaming should be fun, and that's great. But like, let's have 5% also for simulating pandemics or, discovering new things in space. So I was running around doing that. And I got invited to the Institute for the Future to give, they called it was like a lunchtime talk, which is, we'll eat lunch, just tell us about what you're doing. We're kind of interested to hear about you. And I gave my talk about what I was doing. And they're like, yeah, okay, why don't you, quit your job, which I had a full-time game design job, like quit your job, come here and just kind of like hang out with us. We don't have a job description for you, but we think, maybe you could make some games for us, or research what games might become with new technologies or new genres, and just basically come hang out with us. And I'm like, okay, I do want to change the world. And I don't want to I was working for very traditional companies at the time. So I did it. And what I learned is they do this all the time at the Institute, is you've probably heard the saying, Alan Kay has said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So it turns out that a lot of futurists are people with a vision for the future, who are running around doing crazy things, building prototypes, running experiments, starting social movements, and they're able to predict the future because they're actually essentially bringing it into existence through their passion for whatever change or innovation they're trying to make. And I mean, my first successful track record as a futurist was, with my first book, Writing Reality is Broken. We should be inspired by games to change schools and work and health and all of this stuff. And I mean, I think that book was proven right, not because I saw the future coming, because I got a lot of people excited about this idea by helping them imagine what it would feel like to wake up in a world where work was more like a game, or school was more like a game, or working out was more like a game. And then you get people excited by sharing this vision, and then they come along and help you make it real. And so, yeah, that's the secret. Like, if you want to be a futurist, just start doing crazy things that could change the world. And then you'll get recruited and taught all of the secrets of, actual professional skills, which
That's it. That
yeah.
sounds easy. Sounds easy. All right, let's do that. No, okay. So there's two kind of off ramps I want to go on for a second, and then we'll get back to the book. One, I've thinking about like the avatar of the person that I speak with a lot who listens, and this was me, and it still is me to a certain extent. Jane, when you think about someone who, let's say they're a VP of sales at a big company, okay, and they're right now listening to this and they're intrigued, they love your stories, they think your career path is wild, like this is really cool, but then they also say, how does this apply to me?
Mm-hmm.
How does this apply in my here's my world. I'm trying to achieve a number so that I hit the goals that are set forth in front of me by the company. I'm trying to build an amazing culture within my business and my team. I'm hiring, I'm firing, I'm dealing with fires every day that I have to put out. And so when they think of a futurist, they think of someone who can almost see into the future. They think of game simulation.
Mm-hmm.
What advice or what would you say to that person, knowing now that these are their goals, where they're like, Jane, this sounds really cool, but does this really apply to me? Because I'm just trying to kind of build this little world inside of my business so I can keep getting promoted and make money and have a cool job and have a great team, right? That's the thinking. Whereas some of this stuff may seem kind of in the other lane from somebody like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, let me give a couple sort of practical suggestions, because obviously I teach how to think like a futurist for Stanford University's continuing studies program. So I'm getting execs from, all over Silicon Valley. People fly in from all over the world to take this. This is very much I think a core competency for people who are in business or trying to create any kind of change in the world. And so we do talk about sort of practical things. One is just to try to carve out a role for yourself within the organization as fighting short-termism. Now, I mean, if this is not something that's on people's radar right now, we are moving into an era where short-termism will be seen as one of the biggest threats to successful business and innovation, right? We are moving out of the era of move fast and break things and we'll clean it up later. That's done. People are going to be held accountable for being able to anticipate the long-term impacts of the products and services they create, whether it's on our mental health or it's on the environment, on climate, on sustainability, on economic, equality and inequality. We have to be thinking long out. And there's research showing that organizations that have habits baked into their just daily and annual processes, these future thinking habits at 10 years out and longer, they grow faster, they have more profit. It's very much, it's not just sort of about like, feeling ready, being ready. I mean, this is an important part of core business practice. And one thing that you can do if you're not doing anything yet around it, is we talk about signals of change and having a culture of collecting and sharing signals of change. So a signal of change is just something that's real, that's happening today, that you can look at and say, like this is something new and weird is happening here. And you try to anticipate how your work or your organization or community or life would be different if this signal of change became more common. And, I'm doing some work for booksellers now because I'm selling a book. And, they're looking at some pretty interesting signals around book banning, right? There's a rise of, trying to ban books from libraries, ban books from schools. And every time a new book gets banned, it's a signal of change, that booksellers might find themselves at the heart of a culture war, the same way that doctors and nurses who never saw what they did as being controversial because of the pandemic suddenly find what they do at the center of social division, and they have to they have to take this almost political position when that's not how they see themselves. We can see books getting banned now as a signal that maybe booksellers are looking ahead to, it's not something they would have asked for, but they need to prepare for. And so being able to look for these signals of change, bring them to your meetings, put them in your strategy documents, your vision documents, and just make sure that that's on people's radar around your organization, so that you're not just like getting whiplash and responding to things, catching up and fixing problems you've already created. Just kind of fight that short-termism and start baking in these processes like collecting and sharing signals of change.
The living I've been in a place where, and I get it, like I've never been the CEO, so I don't understand the challenges that person was going through. But like this, like we have to hit the quarter, meaning like we'll do anything to hit the quarter, including go straight to that line and maybe even, I don't know. And that just isn't very fun. Like if I don't hit the quarter, I'm going to get fired. You'd hope a board or whoever would set up a place like, let's think long term. Let's not like live quarter to quarter of, oh no, we're getting close, we're short, what can we do? And then you mess up things for the future just to achieve whatever number, and it's not fun. And you fire people and all this stuff happens just to hit the profit number for that quarter. I love that thought of like fight short-termism. I think that's really good. I was thinking of this too, Jane, as you were talking. I think I saw an interview with Jeff Bezos. I'm sure you've watched this one where somebody's like, well, what do you think's going to change coming forward? What do you think's the biggest differences in the future of Amazon or just business in general? And he kind of flips it. He's like, I like to think of what won't change. And he says, what won't change? Do you think about that? Like, do you have these things like what's going to stay the same? What won't change moving forward in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, so it's funny. I run futurist thinking trainings at least once a week. And one of the games that I play with people is called Stump the Futurist. And I have everybody make a list of things they think will not change in the next 10 years, will definitely still be true. And then what I do is I have my colleagues from the Institute on call, and they literally go out and start researching to find signals of change that even these seemingly impossible to change, true for all of evolutionary history, that they could actually change. People will say like, oh, you need genetic material from a man and a woman to make a baby, even if you're doing IVF, even if it's, very high tech, you still need, a man and a woman. And then we'll go out and find, well, look, did you know researchers at Cambridge University are pretty far along in figuring out how we can create human embryos using genetic material from 2 women or 2 men. You don't need the opposite sex material at all. And even these like our basic assumptions. So while I will say, yes, will people still fall in love? Yeah, probably yes. Will we, still need food and oxygen to breathe? I mean, probably yes. Although when people say things like that, then I go start Googling, future of oxygen. A lot of times to unstick our brains, we just go into Google Scholar or Google News and we search for the opposite of whatever we assume. So just the other week, I'm in Google typing, humans don't need oxygen to breathe. And then what comes up? Well, it turns out researchers in Germany are figuring out this kind of photosynthesis artificial lung so that we could breathe carbon dioxide instead of oxygen, like plants. If we're on Mars, there's not a lot of, oxygen. How are we going to breathe? So, I mean, you want to think like, I think we'll still want to fall in love, and, I think basic neuroscience we'll want to be motivated by challenge and things like that. But otherwise, I'm all in on, anything can change, even things that seem impossible to change today.
The second question of your 3 questions to give a baseline sense of your future mindset. When you think about how the world and your life will change over the next 10 years, are you mostly worried or mostly optimistic? How about you, Jane?
Oh, I mean, I'm at heart an optimist. I call myself I'm a techno optimist and a socio optimist, meaning I believe in science. I'm so excited, like mRNA vaccines, they're going to fight cancer. They're going to cure so many, prevent, cure, so many diseases. I think humanity is going to be freed. Think about just even cancer alone, the tremendous burden, the emotional burden, the psychic burden, the trauma, the loss, the financial burden, the strain on healthcare system. Science is just going to solve so many of these problems for us. And I'm very excited about that. I'm excited about geoengineering. I think we are going to find ways to solve the climate situation, and we'll still have to adapt, but I believe, with carbon sequestering and, being able to deflect maybe the sun for a decade or two a little bit by injecting particles into the atmosphere, I'm very optimistic. But at the same time, I also, think terrible things are going to happen and we need to be ready for them. It's why we simulate things like the pandemic. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to move out of California where I live due to wildfire season getting longer and longer. I'm always thinking how many bad air days can I handle? Like how many evacuation warnings can I live with a year? So, we call this like having a balance of positive and shadow imagination. You want to be realistic about the growing risks and threats, but you want to fill your brain with all of the new technologies and policy ideas. I love universal basic income. I'm excited about waking up in a world where we have UBI. You want to fill your brain with things that give you hope so that you don't have to look away from the bad stuff because you're able to face it, knowing that there are solutions and good people trying to figure it out.
What does that sign hanging up in the doorway say? Does it say "Dare to Daydream"? Is that right?
Okay. Yes, it says "Dare to Daydream," and also my other one. You can see it says "Hip Hip Hooray." But
okay, you got to explain.
But I have twin daughters who just turned 7. So, "Dare to Daydream" was a birthday gift that she was given a couple of weeks ago. But bring it on. Like my girls, they also hang up pictures of dragons. And my whole house looks like, a 7-year-old wonderland, which I'm totally here for.
What does "Dare to Daydream" mean to you?
What does it mean to me? I guess, so I'm glad you asked that question. So, a lot of what I deal with, it's not just making predictions about the future, it's the psychology of the future, right? And for a long time, if you went to therapy, what would they ask you about? They would ask you about your past. Right? And this idea that who we are and our emotions and our mood today are primarily determined by things that have already happened to us. In recent years, psychologists have really changed their thinking on this, and they're understanding that oftentimes our feelings and our moods, it's at least as affected by what future we imagine as whatever we've already experienced in the past or the present. And that the way we imagine the future can determine if we're primarily anxious, right? Are we always imagining bad things that we have no control over? That's where anxiety comes from. Are we depressed because we literally can't imagine anything? Ryan, I don't know if you know my backstory around traumatic brain injury, but like the middle of my career was getting this really severe concussion and then getting depressed and suicidal and learning all about the neuroscience of what happens with concussion and traumatic brain injury. And it turns out that you literally stop being able to imagine the future. You just can't see it anymore. Your mind goes blank. And that's where a lot of the suicidal ideation comes from, because your brain literally sees no future for you. And when you try to imagine anything good happening, any reason to live, it's a blank. It has gone black in your mind. And there are neurological reasons for this. Your brain wants you to basically curl up in a ball so it can heal. It doesn't want you out there living your best life, like, but, and all this to say is that if we can't imagine vividly a good future, then it really affects our well-being, our mental stability. So when I see Dare to Daydream, I'm like thinking that, like, well, we need to be pulled into the future by visions that inspire us and motivate us and give us hope. And that's a long way of answering your question, but we need the future. We're not just our past. We are also our future. Even if it hasn't happened yet, it makes us who we are today.
I'm glad I asked that. Number 3 is, how much control or influence do you feel you, in italicized, personally have in determining how the world and your life change over the next 10 years? I love this question. There's a lot there, a lot to get to, because I am a big believer in discipline and taking ownership and responsibility, meaning if something bad happens or good happens, I'm going to take ownership over the fact of what did I do that caused this good or bad thing to happen. And I think that's a core competency for leaders, is to take ownership, even if this definitely comes up in parenting. A kid does something stupid, you got to take ownership. That happens. But at the workplace, this happens with our own poor decisions or good decisions. So I'm a believer in this being a 10. I don't know if I'm right, meaning on a scale of 1 to 10. I think I would like to think I'm going to take complete ownership over determining how, my life changes over the next 10 years. What do you think about this, Jane?
Okay. First of all, I am so impressed with you. I think literally I'm pausing because I'm racking my brain. I've been asking these questions for, a decade now and tracking responses. I've had responses from more than 50,000 people. I literally think you are the first 10 I have ever come across. And this is and I think this partly explains why you've been able to build such a powerful community and inspire people, because who doesn't want to be closer to a 10? I think, well, let's look at like what's going on in the world. So there was this huge study that was published in the Lancet Journal of Global Health, and it found they talked to more than 10,000 young people. So what was their age? It was ages 16 to 25. And they found that 56% of them said they felt that humanity was doomed and they personally have no future. Why? Because they're feeling like climate change is unstoppable, and they are feeling like so depressed and anxious about what they perceive as government's failure to act to help or to create change, right? So if a majority of young people globally feel that humanity has no future and we're doomed, you would see they're not like a 10 on that scale, right? Yeah. Because what are you going to do? I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed by forces outside our control. And one of the things that I do in my work at the Institute and in this book is help people figure out, we can't control the winds of change, right? But we can raise a sail, right? Mm-hmm. We can find a way to I always say there always has to be a way to create moments of joy, to do work that is meaningful, to be of service to others, no matter what world you wake up in, whether it's a pandemic or global migration due to climate change. One of I think the most important forecasts in this book is like, are we ready to live in higher density than most of us do today? Because pretty much any serious climate expert you talk to says large regions of the earth will be uninhabitable due to extreme heat. We're just going to have to move up to 2 billion people. In the United States, we're going to probably have to move 50 million people. We're just going to be living a little more tightly packed in on the Earth's surface. Are we ready to be welcoming? Are we ready to have that, density of humanity build up around us? You can be happy in that future, even if you don't like the sound of it. You can find ways to be of service to others. You can find ways to do meaningful work. And that's where the control for me comes in. And you are probably somebody, no matter what future you wake up in, you're going to get to work. You're going to figure out how to use your unique skills and abilities to help the community or help others and be creative and innovate. And that's why I often will have people start, at a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and we can start using techniques to move them up that scale closer to a 10, where we're not controlling how everything turns out, but confidence that we can have a meaningful life and do good things and find joy no matter what world we wake up in.
I guess part of my answer too is, if and I messed this up, but of really trying hard to focus on what is within my control, and trying hard to not think too much about the things outside of my control. And that's much easier, said than actually in practice. But I think that's part of why I feel that way. I just think taking ownership over your decisions and being responsible for the results that you create, good or bad or in between, is a core leadership excellence competency. Where are you on that, by the way, on a 1 to 10 on the third question?
I would say like a good 7 or 8.
Why are you not a 10?
Well, I'll tell you, the biggest barrier obstacle to me being a 10 is I worry about the growing social divisions and lack of trust in whether it's science or our fellow, citizens or the government. A lot of my optimism comes from believing that we can figure it out. Like humanity can figure it out, right? Like, asteroids. Well, thank God people have basically figured out how to deflect them, like all those movies about apocalypse because we get hit by an asteroid. I mean, there are people out there who figured out we can nuke them. It's going to be fine. They simulate it every 2 years. They're on top of it. Like, I find my optimism that humanity will figure it out, but that I do get, I'm not at a 10 because I think, well, humanity can figure it out, but people may be motivated to, disrupt us successfully enacting solutions, or that, I worry, like, if we can literally prevent cancer through mRNA vaccines, are we really going to still be fighting about vaccines? Or can we just get over it? Because who does not want cancer to be gone? Who has not been personally affected, and had grief in their life over that? But that's for me, that's like the fuzzy area.
This movie just came out. Have you seen it on Netflix?
Don't look up.
You're describing the movie, which is just, I didn't know it was what it was before I turned it on. And I remember looking over to my wife saying, what's going, like, I didn't realize it was one of these types of movies of like just making fun of whatever. I do, speaking of the asteroid, and this is because this is a question that I'm going to start asking even more, but I've randomly gotten there, and I'm going to be more intentional. And I think for people who have sustained excellence over time, there's usually a person behind the person. What I mean by that is, like, maybe it's a mentor or somebody there. And in your book on future scenario number 2, the question is, have you checked the asteroid forecast? Let's say the impact date is May 1st, 3 years from now. After hearing this news, whom do you want to talk to about what this means? And I think this is my way of getting to the, like, who is the person or the people behind the person that is you, Jane, that have played like a significant role in making you who you are, where there's a love there now, you're grateful for them? Maybe it's a single person. I would love to hear who the person behind you is.
Oh, what a beautiful question. I mean, I let me point to a community first.
Okay.
So there are a couple of Zen monasteries in the Bay Area that I have been lucky enough to be involved with, going back to the early 2000s. So the Palo Alto Zen Center and the San Francisco Zen Center. And whatever your idea of Buddhist monks are, if you haven't participated in a Zen center community, I mean, there are artists, there are, former CEOs who have retired and dedicated themselves to this new training. There are activists, it's such a cool community of people who, I always, when people say, like, well, what's your work really about? Like, what are you really trying to do? For me, it's to witness the suffering that exists and try to alleviate it as best I can, whether that's through designing a game that allows people to feel joy, even if they're dealing with depression and anxiety, or creating a simulation so that when people show up in a difficult future, they're not suffering, they're like ready to go and act. In general, like the Zen community and just being able to witness that people are suffering. I feel like we don't acknowledge enough how hard life is for most people, and how important it is to see, that every one of us wakes up with it, whether it's a physical health challenge, it's mental health, it's social challenges, it's how much energy we're pouring into goals, that it's like taking all of us to stay engaged. I think we could, I don't know. I try to bring that awareness of suffering to what I do so that I can play a part in alleviating it.
I think that one of the biggest parts of when you talk about the traumatic brain injury is like the lack of ability to see a future, the lack of ability to see a potential. And as you were saying that and telling that story, it just made me think of like the happiest and most fulfilling moments is usually when I see like a really exciting future, selfishly for myself or my family, but I think we all initially think of that, and then maybe even for the world, but that's a really big part of it. And I think that's a huge takeaway for me, and probably for, I hope for others, is to think about, first seeing it for yourself, but then also if you know somebody that's struggling, that is one way to potentially help. And I don't know exactly how you get there to the point of that, but just knowing that is an avenue and a place that we want to get to, where you can see excitement in the future of some. This is why experiential gifts are so amazing, because you give them the gift of, we're going to go on vacation to Disney World, and then you get the excitement of opening it, then you're thinking about it, then you're getting ready for it, the anticipation, then you actually go, then you have the memory dividends afterwards of the pictures. There's so many amazing things about it because you feel the future. I think like that's a critical takeaway from all this, from a leadership perspective. You're leading a team, you're leading your family, you're leading yourself, is thinking about creating some sort of excitement towards what's possible in the future.
And I can give you a 30-second practical activity to, like, what if you don't know what should be in that vision, right? So what you do is you just try to imagine yourself waking up 10 years from today, and you start with whatever it is that wakes you up. What woke you? And I'm asking you to imagine a future that you would like to wake up in, right? So is it an alarm clock, or is it somebody calling you? Who's calling you? Like, who would you be excited to get a call from 10 years from today? Or is it the sound of an animal? Like, are you hearing certain like birds, or where are you? What woke you up? And then, look next to you. Who's next to you? Are you alone? Are you with a partner? Is it the same partner or a different partner? you start to construct.
I don't know if it's good. It's a different part.
Hey,
Hey.
I recently had somebody really change their whole marriage based on imagining 10 years in the future. It can happen, but
Okay, sorry.
but you start to fill in, but and you don't have to, as you wake up, okay, what mood are you in? Why are you in this mood? What are you excited about? What are the thoughts running through your mind? What are you going to get dressed in today? Why are you putting that on? Like, how does it fit? What do you wear? And you start it turns out we can learn so much about our truest hopes, our deepest values, just by imagining ourselves waking up from that very initial moment. The more vividness and detail you bring in, the more you learn about, that is something that could drive me, or that is a goal I could set, or a skill I could develop, or a relationship I could build.
I love that exercise. I love it. That's really practical and useful. Do you have time for one more question, Jane, before we go? You're meeting with someone earlier in their career, maybe a recent grad, early 20s, mid 20s. I know this happens for you all the time, probably. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you give to that person?
Biggest piece of advice: be a spotlight for other people's good ideas. I think too many people try to put the spotlight on themselves, but every good thing that has happened to me in my career has been because I saw someone else doing something I thought was cool, and I did everything I could to bring attention to it. I would write just like a blog post about everything I thought was amazing about this game that someone else had designed. Or if I, had a chance to like teach a class, I'm going to make their book the center of my class, and I'm going to tell everybody why I think this person is so brilliant. And if you can find lots of people whose work you admire, whose projects you admire, and you're just like this, just radiating love and appreciation, I just feel like that is the best way to draw people into your orbit, either the people you're writing about or talking about, or people who are inspired by the same things. And so like less about you, less about promoting yourself. It's actually by promoting other people that you develop your own, like the trust level and the brands and all of that. That comes from people saying, yeah, they really, I want to see the world the way that they do. So you have to show the world that you're seeing, and not just pointing the spotlight at yourself.
Spread positive gossip, right?
Yes.
Talk kindly behind the backs of others, right?
Yes.
I think that's a teaching thing we try to say in our house, of like, find opportunities, create opportunities to speak kindly behind someone's back, as opposed to what most do, and be known as someone who spreads positive gossip. This is so good. Jane's book is called Imaginable: How to See the Future Coming and Feel Ready for Anything, even things that seem impossible today. It will flip you upside down and make you think, which is what, I don't know how you do it, because I immediately think of like, when this page was blank and now we have this, how did she do it? So huge props, Jane, and thanks so much for being here. I would certainly love to continue our dialogue as we both progress.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. I mean, at the very least, let's have something on our calendar for 10 years from today, and we'll revisit.
I wonder what we'll be doing then. I don't know how we can. Well, I'm guessing it won't be Zoom, but we'll figure something out. It'd be great.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.